Hello, welcome to Bites Bread and Barbecue. I'm Ross Cantino. I thought that I would do a quick comparison of several different distributions of Linux. Over the past few months, I've kind of gone down a rabbit hole where I just tried all these different versions, would get frustrated with one or tired of one and reformat my hard drive and try another. So it was suggested to me by somebody in the Linux fans group on Facebook that maybe I should do some sort of comparison of the different distributions. Now this is very superficial, I didn't go in depth. I basically looked at neofetch for resources, maybe loaded a browser, and maybe looked at some of the setting controls, and to show you how they appeared different in their use, their shell, and their appearance. So let's take a look at these different things. I'm going to start with a little introduction of what versions I'm going to be showing you and how I came to arrive at them. So let's get going. I decided to make a little introduction as to how I went down my distro hopping history over the last 5 months. Since I retired, I've been experimenting with various distributions of Linux. I've created a series of virtual machines. Each machine that I'm going to show you today has 4 gigabytes of RAM, 128 megabytes of video, 4 CPU processors, and they're all running from a USB attached SSD drive. So these are minimal conditions with a slow USB connection. Don't judge the speed by everything you're seeing here today, but I will be showing you light implementations as well as heavier implementations. So first, purchased a book in 2000 for Manjaro Linux. Now Linus Torvalds released Linux in 1991, and I was in the mall one day and I saw this book and it was talking about Linux. I had an interest in computers and I didn't know what it was, and I picked it up. In the back cover there was a CD-ROM that installed Manjaro Linux. And this was kind of a version of Red Hat, but it had a KDE interface at the time. The distribution had French roots. I installed this onto a separate hard drive and created a dual boot machine, and I became fascinated with Linux. In 2004, Ubuntu arrived. And it seemed like Ubuntu was a very stable version of Linux. It was touted as being easy for first-time users that wanted to try Linux, and it was supposed to be a smooth version of Linux out there for everybody to try. I downloaded an installation disk for Warty Warthog and installed that. Now, Ubuntu is based on Debian Linux structure. It is made by a company called Canonical out of the UK. And today it comes with a GNOME interface. At times they have their own called Unity, and at other times they've been using GNOME. Currently, in their long-term support version, they're running GNOME 42, which is not the most recent. It does use Snap as its software resource, and I have some issues with that. Some of the problems I've had from time to time are that the implementations of software that are found on Snap may not be the current release, or they may not be the newest release available in other locations. So that's my one issue that I have with Ubuntu, and I found that some of the older software may not necessarily run as well or with as many features as the newer software. Linux Mint is an Ubuntu-based system. Technically, it's registered as an Irish company. They use the Cinnamon desktop shell as their flagship, although it comes in several flavors. You can also get it with XFCE and MAT, which is like a GNOME 2 interface. It's very easy to use. It has a very familiar interface. It looks a lot like Windows 10, so if you're transitioning from Windows 10 to a Linux system, Linux Mint is a very good way to go. It works flawlessly, it has very few problems, and it does have proprietary drivers for things like NVIDIA graphics card and so forth. It's very easy to use, it's very smooth. Frankly, I don't know why I don't use that. It's just that I think I've been using Ubuntu longer. Kubuntu. I recently was using Kubuntu 2310. This is Ubuntu with a KDE shell. It's sanctioned by Canonical, but from what I've read, it's kind of outsourced to another company called Blue Systems. But all of the repositories and everything are still Ubuntu repositories and managed by Canonical. This is a very recent version of Kubuntu. It is not their long-term support version, and what the numbers mean is 23.10 means that it was released in 2023 in the 10th month of October. It continues to use Snap repositories with the same pitfalls as Ubuntu. Now, there are ways to get around Snap on both these distributions. You can actually install Flatpak and the GNOME software store to get around them and use a different way of installing your software to both these environments. Fedora Linux. Fedora is based on Red Hat. It is its free and open source version of Red Hat. Red Hat is a commercial product that a lot of businesses and servers use. It is a USA-based release. To the best of my knowledge, it is the only US-based release of Linux. That's probably incorrect because you could have Joe's Linux if somebody wanted to develop it in a basement, but it is the most popular and best known USA release. It is always touted as having the cutting-edge GNOME interface. They always have the most recent release. It's very visually appealing, it's very sleek, it's very smooth. It does come with the GNOME store installed and Flatpak as its software source. Manjaro and XFCE. Manjaro comes in many flavors. You can get it with GNOME, KDE, XFCE, plus a whole series of other very lightweight shells to apply to that. Manjaro is based on Arch Linux with rolling releases. It's developed in Austria, Germany, and France. It targets beginner users in that one of the very first questions it asks you when you install is if you want to use proprietary drivers for things like your graphics card, and it'll automatically detect those and install them. As such, gamers tend to like this because it'll put the proper graphics drivers on their computer and everything. In this example, I'm going to be showing you XFCE because I wanted an example of that. It's a very lightweight shell for speed. It is very elegant, it is very smooth, and if you want to revive an older computer, XFCE may be one of the ways to go. I placed this on a computer that was about 2004 vintage for a friend, and it made it run like a brand new computer. Manjaro uses Pacman to manage its software resources, a little bit different than the other two, making the terminal commands slightly different than the Debian flavored varieties of Linux that are out there. I really liked Manjaro. I thought it was clean. I really enjoyed running it. I was running a GNOME version, and I got very frustrated in that when it would go to be suspended, it wouldn't wake up. So I ended up wiping that and putting the Kubuntu 23.10 on my computer, only to find afterwards that the reason my computer wouldn't wake up was not because of Manjaro, it was because of my Steam installation. So there is no real problem with the Manjaro on my computer if I ever wanted to go back to it. So the conclusions about this, I learned a lot about Linux because of all the different versions I tried the last 5 months. They're all rock solid under the hood. They're all Linux under the hood. I'm currently running Ubuntu 22.04 long-term support. Not sure how long. I'm very familiar with it. It is a nice interface. Will I change next week? It's kind of hard to tell. So let's take a look at these different environments. First up, let's take a look at my system running Ubuntu 22.04. It's a very clean interface. It used to be that you could press activities up here and you get a drop-down menu. You can still add that as an extra add-on. However, it's not the way that it works anymore. It comes with a dock installed, and you can put that on any side of the screen. I currently have it so it doesn't extend side to side to give me that centered look, somewhat like Mac in appearance, but of course the icons I have here are the default ones for Ubuntu. Now, I do have Zoom running in the background here so that I can have my picture up on the screen here a little bit, using that as a virtual green screen. A little bit of resources, but I wanted to show you what's called neofetch, and this will show you that I'm currently running Ubuntu long-term support and that I'm using a Linux kernel 6.5.0, which is not the newest. But that's what comes with Ubuntu, and I'm running a GNOME 42.9. Again, not the latest cutting edge, but very stable. And you can see that currently I'm using 4.6 gigabytes out of my 16 gigabytes that are available. And that's because I'm recording, I've got Zoom running, and now I'm trying to record at the same time. But normally, if you're just running this with nothing else running, it takes about 1 gig of memory to run. I also have a few little oddities here. I have a weather for my local weather, and I also have Bing wallpaper installed that allows me to get different backgrounds every day that are usually spectacular. This is an add-on as well under the GNOME interface. So if you press your Windows key on the keyboard, it'll bring you up and show you all your windows that are running, and you can start typing in here. Like if I wanted to run the terminal, it'll show me that application that I'm looking for. You hit the escape button and you're back to your desktop. This is slightly different from when you press the show applications, which gives you the image of both the desktops that are available, but it also shows all the apps that are installed, and that you can move between the pages of apps here to see everything that is installed on the computer, and you can see all of the apps that are running. That is typically the way the newer versions of GNOME work, in that if you press the Windows key, you just get a search bar, and if you hit the block of 9 down here, it'll come up and show you all the apps that are available. Plus, you can launch whatever is down here right from the bar and have it come open immediately. For example, if I wanted to put up Ken Live to do any type of video editing, it'll pop right up and you can see how it's going. Now, that hesitated a little bit there because of all the video intensive things that I'm doing right now. But this is basically how Ubuntu looks and feels and how it runs. It is extremely stable. Here we are in Linux Mint. Also a very clean interface, very reminiscent of a Windows-like appearance. This is why I feel that this is something nice for people who are transitioning from Windows into Linux. You can see it has a start button in the lower left-hand corner, several applications attached to the taskbar, information here on the right with a clock, and it's just clean. When you press the menu looks very much like what you would see in Windows 10. If you select Internet, you can pop over to any of these particular applications that are present. It comes with a full Office suite, sound and video. It installs proprietary drivers. It is just very, very clean. And the other thing that's interesting with Linux Mint is when you first install it, it comes up to this welcome screen. Now you can disable this, but it does take you through all the things that you can set up from your desktop colors, your driver management, your update manager. You can configure the entire system on that first visit. You can read the different documentation, you can find help files, and if you want to, you can get involved with the project. And it's kind of a nice little feature. So let's just open up the terminal here from Linux Mint. And I don't know if you noticed, the icon is slightly different, the arrow on your screen here, your mouse pointer. It's sleek and it doesn't have a stem. And whenever you do anything to cause the computer to pause for a second, you get a multicolored wheel. It's very visually appealing. Now, this is the latest version of Linux Mint as of this date, which is version Virginia. And if we look at neofetch, we can see that Linux Mint 21.3, which is the latest version, but look at the kernel, 5.15. So this is not only an entire generation behind what we saw in Manjaro, it is several generations of Linux kernel behind when Ubuntu and Kubuntu are running as well. They're all running Linux 6 at this point in time, where Linux Mint is still running 15. Now, having said that, I haven't looked into Linux Mint, but I know in the past, the current version of Linux Mint, I haven't checked. In the past, Ubuntu and some of the other shells gave you the option of running either X11 graphics or Wayland graphics. That was never available on Linux Mint. I have not checked. This is the first time I've actually even run Virginia with the Cinnamon interface. but supposedly, according to the Linux community, Wayland is the way that things are going to go in the future, and Linux Mint has not been using that. But take a look at our memory use here. I've been talking about lightweight interfaces and everything. Out of the 4 gigabytes that I gave them, they're using 710 megabytes. I was surprised to see that this is even less than the XFCE that Linux Manjaro was using. So technically speaking, this is running in less memory and should run very quickly on any computer that you supply it to. Let's just take a look. We've been launching Firefox on each of these just to get an impression. Let's see how long it takes for Firefox to load under the same conditions. And remember, this is coming off a USB external drive, and I've given it limited resources. This is not the way it would run on a clean install. So to me, it seemed like that was about the same amount of time that it took in the other distributions of Linux we've been looking at. And if we skip through these steps and just see, we've been pulling up the BBC on each of these browsers, and it was about the same speed. So I don't know that I can say that there was a whole lot of difference between the various versions and launching Firefox. But I do think that this is the easiest way to move from a Windows, at least Windows 10 environment, to a Linux environment. They also give you a series of shortcuts here. You can go immediately to your various settings that you can pull up here, and you should be even though it's not neofetch, you should be able to see an about here. Might make a liar out of me. Let's see if it has system. It does, system info. And that's what I was looking for. And this is very much similar to what we saw on neofetch, although this does tell you that the display server is X11 and not Wayland. So that may still be a persistent thing with Linux Mint, but perhaps that's what's letting it to run later or whatever, but it is a very smooth interface, and I would strongly suggest this for beginning Linux users. Let's take a look at Kubuntu 23.10. Kubuntu is essentially Ubuntu with a KDE interface, as we discussed before. And KDE is a very pleasant, clean looking, this is their default interface normally, and that background is also supplied from KDE. As you can see, as with some of the other versions of Linux here, we have a sort of a start button in the lower left-hand corner and several applications across the bottom. It does use Discover as its software store, and this is connected to Snap, which, as I discussed earlier in the introductory presentation, that Snap doesn't tend to have the most recent implementations of some of this software in my experience. This is also where you would get your software updates for Linux that would come here. And it seems to be running fairly quickly, as we've done with the other ones. Let's launch Firefox and see what kind of speed we get out of that. Again, it's the first time run for Firefox on this computer, and it kind of looks like it's not doing anything, but it's probably thinking. This is taking a bit longer than we saw on Linux Mint and XFCE. Here comes Firefox. And if we click through the orientations here to skip this step, skip this step, skip this step, and start browsing. We've been going to the bbc.com website. Let's pull that up, and the speed, I thought it was a slower load, but the speed once you start browsing is about the same, with the same resources available to this computer. So let's take a look at what the application menu looks like in this. It, again, is somewhat reminiscent of Windows. If we come down here to our internet, we can see all of our internet applications that we would just slide over and select. It comes with a full Office suite again. It has LibreOffice present here, and it's all right off button there. If I go and I type in something I'm looking for, like I'm looking for terminal, which in KDE is called console, and I bring that up and we type in neofetch. Let's see what kind of resources we're using here. We're using 815 megabytes out of the 4 gigabytes that I have given it. Interestingly, slightly more, 100 megabytes more than Linux Mint, but still substantially less than GNOME and XFCE. I'm really surprised by the XFCE using more memory than some of these other shells. You'll also notice that Kubuntu is running 6.5.0, which is the same as Ubuntu, which is what we would expect. It gives basically the same data since I'm running this on the same type of computer. But I was sort of surprised to see that the Linux Mint with Cinnamon Desktop is actually coming in with the lowest memory requirements to run in the same system. A very pleasant surprise for a sleek interface. Now, the one thing that I do like, as I said about GNOME, how I like to run, up here you can see on my Ubuntu desktop the Bing Daily wallpaper. I like to run that so that I get new wallpaper every day. With KDE interface, that is all built in. You don't need a separate app. It comes up with the desktop settings here when you go to choose your background. You can see that this does appear to be laboring a bit. It's taking a while for that to come up. There we go. And what we're going to do, instead of picking one of these images that they supply, if we go down here to picture of the day, and look at these resources that you can get a daily wallpaper every day from National Geographic, Bing, astronomy, whatever. Let's just see what National Geographic, but this is the same Bing that I have installed on my Ubuntu. Let's see what National Geographic gives us today. We're going to apply that, and I'm assuming, oh, that's interesting. It'll give us different, let's see, Bing should give us the same wallpaper that I have on my desktop, and it does in fact. And let's look at NASA. What kind of image are they going to give us? They're going to give us something with Jupiter here to see the red spot rotation. But I thought that the National Geographic is kind of interesting, and that'll change it right up, and that's all built right into KDE. There are a lot of built-in features too. If we go into settings, and if we go to themes under the settings with KDE, you can actually pick out entire, if I want to just change the theme, global theme. Of course, you can do your night and dark and all that kind of stuff. Almost every version of Linux. Now, these are the different themes, but if we go and we look at new global themes, we should be able to look at all these different things. You can make it look like Windows 11. I'm not sure why you would want to do that. You can make it look like a Mac. You can make it look like all sorts of different things, and all these themes can be downloaded. We'll change all your icons, the way your bars appear. It'll make it all completely different, and it just changes it all with a single click. So it is a very interesting thing to do that in GNOME. You have to create subdirectories, you have to download specific groups of themes, icons, backgrounds, and expand them and unpack them and then install them with GNOME tweaks. Where here in KDE, it's completely built in. So there are certain advantages to running KDE, but as we saw, the memory required under Linux Mint appears to be the least out of all these different versions. So that's our quick look at KDE here. Let's take a look at Fedora. As we talked about, this is a version of Red Hat that is slightly different. If you'll notice, they are running GNOME at Fedora as well, but there's no bar down at the bottom. This belongs to my Ubuntu down here, and we're running in a window. But what you can see is that there's no actual shortcut bar at the bottom. Now, a couple nice things about Fedora. When you pop down this little window here, you can go right to your settings and it'll bring them up. And this is also present in Ubuntu through GNOME. But if any of these that you expand, like your wired connection, you can see how it's set up, and you can actually expand the settings from this menu right from the onset at your top bar. Once again, if we hit the Windows key on the keyboard, then you can see that you have the shortcut bar at the bottom and you can add. Notice that that still brings you up to where you can type in a terminal command, okay? And it'll bring you exactly to that application. And just so we can compare, now try to remember this is running in a virtual machine with 4 CPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, and 128 of video. So it's gonna be slower than my other machine, but it's also running on top of my other machine. So if we would look at neofetch and my Ubuntu right now, it would be missing those 4 gigabytes of RAM that I just gave to this Fedora. But let's take a look at neofetch. So we can see here at neofetch that this is using about 1.1 gigabytes of the 4 gigabytes of RAM that I gave it. And this is a pretty pleasant interface, it's pretty robust, and you're still only using 1 gigabyte. You're also going to notice that you're using GNOME 45. Remember in Ubuntu we were using GNOME 43 or 42. So this is the more recent version of GNOME, and the Linux kernel is slightly newer. It's 6.5.6. I think that Ubuntu is 6.5.0, but still in that same family of kernel. And you can see that it's running in a virtual box here. But just to give you an example of how things may run here a little bit, if we would open a browser window, and this may be the first time I'm running this, so it may come up a little bit slow with a configuration screen for Firefox. So, and it did. So we're going to skip these steps and go through here just to see how this would look once you get your browser up and running. And we're going to go right to start browsing. And if we type in here, I don't know, who do you like? The BBC? Oh. Let's go to the BBC. And it'll pull it right in, and browsing looks like it does pretty much on any other operating system. Now, if you do go to the software store here, as I discussed in the PowerPoint, the software store does use Flatpak. And it's also telling me that there are 65 updates that I can install here. It'll do this at any time. It'll also tell me which applications are already installed by default. And this is a clean install in here that I've done nothing to. So, and it'll give you all the different types of software, and typically these are all free on Linux. That is the big advantage. So, all in all, Fedora is very clean. It has the latest version of GNOME. It uses the GNOME store with Flatpak to get your software installations, which in my experience tend to be the most recent versions. Looking at Manjaro with XFCE present here. And if you look at the environment right off, it kind of gives you that same feeling that you might have had in Windows 10. You have your trash can over here, your file system, your home folder. On the desktop in the upper right-hand corner, you have what looks like a start button down here at the bottom. You have the clock on the right. So if we press the start button, the menu on XFCE has been somewhat simplified, but is very, very easy to use. Say that we wanted to come up here and we wanted to look for our internet apps. We click on internet and you can see that it's got Firefox browser. And I haven't launched this. We just looked at other Firefox installations. Let's take a look at how quickly it comes up here. This is a much lighter weight operating shell than GNOME, and it should run quicker. It does not appear to be the case, but here we come. Here is Firefox. So it's probably going to come up with the first screen that they want you to configure. We're going to skip all this stuff. And we're just trying to get to the browse phase. We're going to start browsing. That might have been a little bit quicker than when we were on Fedora. And we tried the BBC. See how quickly that comes up. And here we go. And that was pretty quick for running in a virtual machine here in a labor-intensive process. But it is a very, very lightweight, clean interface. Let's bring up the terminal and take a look at neofetch. And we can see that if we type neofetch here, there's Manjaro Linux. Now take a look. This is actually running kernel 6.6.10. Remember on Ubuntu and Fedora, we were running 6.5. This is 6.6. So this is a newer kernel, a newer version of Linux that's out there. Part of the reason that is that Manjaro is based on Arch Linux, which is a rolling release. So you're gonna see things that it's gonna be a little bit more up to date on all of its releases. The other thing that you're gonna see is, notice that where we were looking at GNOME being a little bit more bloated, maybe 200 megabytes more, here we're running this XFCE in 983, and it's running quite a bit in the background. Like I told you, I've used this on older computers to make them run like new ones, and it has never let me down. I was surprised to see that it was only 200 megabytes less than GNOME, but it definitely, on a full install on our regular hard drive, gives you a speedy operating system. Of course, Manjaro installs proprietary drivers, and the other thing is it comes with a full Office suite. It installs all of LibreOffice, and this all comes, I haven't touched any of this. This is the way that the system comes. After you install it, it comes with all that software. You can customize your different desktop settings and colors. It should have a light and dark mode with a ton of different wallpapers you can select from. And while I like to use Bing Daily Wallpaper, you do have to use a third-party application to get that to work on XFCE. You do not have to get it to work on Manjaro if you're using GNOME or KDE, but if you're using XFCE and you want daily change your wallpaper, you have to use something else, or you have to use a Python script. Those are the two ways to do it. I do have videos on my YouTube channel on how to do both of those things. So this is just a quick little look at speedy XFCE and how the interface is slightly different and cleaner. I would highly recommend it if you've got lower resources. So, and that was the 5 forms of Linux that I've used over the last several months, formatting my hard drive with each of them over and over. And currently I've landed back on my old faithful Ubuntu, although I really did like Manjaro. So if you found this comparison or brief look at these different environments helpful, click the like button down below, and if you really liked it, hit the subscribe button. So come again to Bites, Bread, and Barbecue. Thanks, bye.